Oh,
I've heard of them for other things, so you have to look at their website. They're putting out that right thing,
All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming. See, everybody's afraid of this side, but, you know. So today is our third session of our Fall 2024 series of Book Sandwiched In. It is sponsored by our friends at the library. We're very grateful. If you've been here for other sessions, you'll already know that because I have to say it, but we are truly, truly grateful to them. They sponsor many of our programs here at the library. This fall's series was themed around national parks. So the first week we had the Everglades, last week we had Yellowstone, and this week we have the Grand Canyon. Next week will be Yosemite to round out our series. If you're interested in learning more about Richmond Reads, we have little pamphlets over on the table over there. We've got coffee, tea, cookies, so please help yourself. And we have a door prize today, which is $10 to Pub Coffee Hub, so if you'd like to enter for that, please do so. We'll do the drawing at the end. So thank you to Janice for agreeing to speak today. Janice is an avid hiker, runner, and lover of adventure, which is why we asked her to do this book, because it was kind of a perfect fit. She's an Adirondack 46er who has hiked in Spain and Italy, as well as to the bottom of the Grand Canyon. She's a retired school counselor who resides in the town of Batavia with her husband, Paul. They have 3 adult daughters and 6 grandchildren. So that's Janice's little bio, and I'm going to let her take it away.
Thank you. This was the perfect book choice for me, and I'm honored to be part of a series that has been in place for like 40 years. So kudos to the library that you've been able to continue this program for so long. Before I begin, how many people have been to the Grand Canyon? Just show of hands. Oh, a lot of you. Okay. Has anyone hiked beyond the rim? Yay! A fellow hiker back there. A Walk in the Park, the true story of a spectacular misadventure in the Grand Canyon by Fedarko. And then there's me sitting at the rim before we started hiking. This is from 2023, from last year. This book is a memoir, and it's also a travelogue, and it's got a lot of history of the natives in the canyon woven throughout. The author grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which is known for steel production and pretty terrible pollution. At age 11, his father gave him the book, The Man Who Walked Through Time by Colin Fletcher, which he bought for 10 cents at a used book sale. Later, he said, my father's placing that book in my hands was an act of generosity and kindness, and a bit of departure from the code by which he lived his life. Although he perceived the world through eyes that marveled at its vastness and wonder, he had little interest in moving beyond where he came from. He also said, the image on the cover took hold of me and refused to let go. At age 38, he walked away from a steady job, and he worked in the canyon on the Colorado River with a whitewater rafting company. He looks back and he acknowledges the depth of his ignorance in that first season. He says that he seemed intent on setting a record for the most unpardonable screw-ups of any rookie in the canyon. One day while he's on this river crew, they spotted 4 men with backpacks picking their way through the boulders along the shore. One of his river colleagues rode out to them, offered them dinner, and to spend the night. Now these river trips are luxury in the backpacking world. I mean, they bring incredible, all the stuff to make it, all the amenities, so to make it really comfortable for the people who pay a lot of money to do the trips. So they offered for them to have dinner with them and spend the night. Dinner was probably like steak and baked potatoes or something. They probably had dehydrated food in their backpacks. The author got a good look at these men and said, I never forgot the look in their eyes. It was a mixture of misery, fatigue, defeat, and something that looked like euphoria. His colleagues said, those guys are the real deal. This encounter stayed with him, and he spent a lot of time thinking. As exhilarating and seductive as the river was, its footprint was only 1% of the surface of the rest of the canyon. What about the other 99%? Then in 2015, his friend and National Geographic photographer Pete McBride approached him with the idea of an end-to-end canyon reverse. So not going down to the river and coming back up, but hiking the length of the canyon. So first in the book, he explains kind of how unusual this would be. Here's what the statistics are like in terms of visitors to the Grand Canyon. Approximately 5 million people visit each year. Last year was 4.7 million. Of those, about 5% will venture below the rim. That would be 236,000 last year. Of those, 10% will get to the river, so about 23,000. That is 1/2 of 1% of the visitors. So they get tons of visitors, 1/2 of 1% get down to the river. It's a very small percentage. In 2023, they issued 10,303 backcountry permits, not all of whom were used. And what's one interesting point is the author, in all of this book, which is over 400 pages long, never once mentioned permits. And it left me wondering, because my experience hiking in the canyon, the permits are very important, and if you get caught without a permit, there's some hefty fines and such. So I'm not sure if it was because they weren't using developed campgrounds, you know, or maybe they had permits and he didn't mention it in the book. At the time his friend Pete suggested the hike, only 10 people had traversed the canyon in a single hike, one fell swoop from start to end. About a dozen more had done it in sections, doing a part, going back up, going back at it. Okay, so the number of people that traversed the canyon at that point were fewer than the number of people that have stood on the boom. This tells you how unusual it is and what a difficult hike it is. So altogether, at the time Pete wanted to do this hike, there had only been about 22 people who'd ever done it. This statistic I threw in for kicks. It was not about mule riders in the book at all, but when I was researching statistics, it told us how many mule riders there were. So in 2023, there were 650 mule riders from the South Rim. So South Rim offers 1 or 2 day trips. There were another 5,000 riders from the North Rim. The North Rim offers 1 hour and half-day trips. So another a little less than 6,000 people last year went down on a mule. The author also talks about the death statistics. And this is the statistics out of the book. The numbers don't add up totally, so I'm not sure why that inconsistency, except there may be some that are unaccounted reasons. We don't know how they died. But in the book, he said more than 800 people have perished in the canyon in the last century and a half. And it is one of the deadliest national parks. 43 boaters drowned, 88 people committed suicide there. There were 138 pilots and passengers killed in air tour accidents. 202 hikers swept away by flash floods, crushed by a falling rock, bitten by a venomous snake, or felled by dehydration and heat stroke, or stepped off a cliff unknowingly, which does happen. It's very steep. The author's point is that the canyon's backcountry is a place where even veterans, a single misplaced step or a poor decision could be fatal. In my research in 2023, they performed 455 hiker assists. That would be things like maybe somebody has a sprained ankle and they need help, or they ran out of water and they came to bring them water. Things that would assist the hikers and they would be able to get out safely. Another 302 search and rescue. These might be lost hikers. People who have backcountry permits can choose whatever route and trail and not trail if they want to bushwhack it. And they might have been lost and they had to go find them. Or rescues, meaning they were in such poor shape they could not get out of the canyon alone and they had to be taken out of the canyon by whatever means necessary. And in 2023, there were 10 fatalities. And the book was written, I believe, in 2023, so there's 10 more since he wrote the book. This photo is a photo of mine from early in the hike, the rim, close to the rim when you begin descending. And I just put it up there because I didn't want to leave death certificates while I talked, or death statistics while I talked. So there's some eye candy for you. When I read how they started out for this hike, it was appalling how unprepared they were. They were basically attempting one of the most difficult hikes in the US off the couch. They ordered gear, never got around to unpacking it. The day they were to start the hike, they put all these boxes in their friend's truck, drove the 100 miles to where they were going to meet their expedition group. They arrived in darkness, fumbled to unpack everything and try to get organized, and didn't know how to use most of the equipment, and they also paid no attention to weight. In the end, their backpacks weighed in at 53 and 55 pounds. The rest of their group, who were all experienced backpackers, the average, they were starting out at about 33 pounds. So they were well over 20 pounds more than experienced backpackers would carry. As they started the hike, a person in a truck that had just dropped off a group of river guides recognized Kevin, the author, and offered him a chance to bail. Kevin said, "We've got this." And the driver replied, "It's your funeral." So with infected blisters for Kevin and a severe case of hyponatremia for Pete, along with a serious mileage deficit over where the group had planned to be because these two rookies were along with them, they ended up quitting after 5 harrowing days. Rich, who was in charge of this expedition group, used an inReach. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's like a spot, some are called Spot or inReach. It's a device that a hiker can carry, kind of an SOS device, where you can reach somebody and give notice that you need help and you need rescue. So Rich used an inReach to get a crew at the rim to head down and meet them for the rescue. Pete's condition worsened so much on the day that they left that he was confused and slightly delirious. They had to keep starting and stopping, basically going from one patch of shade to the next patch of shade. The group they were with, they all went through their packs, and someone found packets of soy sauce. Pete sucked the soy sauce down, which enabled him to pull himself to his feet again. The rescue team got to them. They carried coconut water, which is rich in potassium. And when they reached them, Pete downed a whole liter of coconut water right on the spot. Once they were out, Pete had to see a surgeon due to cactus spines that were deep in his right ankle. And he had to be treated by a physician who specialized in heat-related illnesses. Because even after getting out of the canyon, he continued to have some pretty life-interrupting symptoms. They didn't know if they would go back, but soon they had a team of very experienced and knowledgeable people who were helping them. They were mentored, they were trained, they began to buy into the ultralight mentality. I don't know if anybody else who's ever hiked does this, but when I'm going to get on a hike, I get my scale out, and there's 3 shirts, I like them all, I weigh them, and if this one's a ½ ounce less, I take that. That's the ultralight mentality. You don't carry. My father and mother were section hikers of the Appalachian Trail. I remember watching my dad cut the tags out of his shirt. Okay, so that's ultralight mentality. They redid their nutrition and food plan. They studied topographic maps, and they went back at it. It is not a spoiler to tell you that they made it, because if they didn't, there wouldn't be a book. But there is a surprise in the ending, which I really liked, and I'm not going to give it away. So you might have to read the book. The book is written with beautiful descriptive language, and it's in an honest and vulnerable voice. He told of their mistakes. He didn't downplay the fact that their egos got in the way sometimes. There are also 16 pages of beautiful photographs by his friend and trailmate Pete, who was taking pictures for National Geographic. Let's see. As I said at the beginning of the talk, there's a substantial amount of information about the history of the land woven into the book. The canyon was home to 11 different tribes whose ancestral lands either abut or lie directly inside what is now the national park. To them, the canyon is considered a sacred space. During his journey, the author met two women, Renee Yellowhorse of the Navajo Nation and Diana Sue White Dove Ukwala of the Havasupai tribe. On their second venture into the canyon, after one night mistakenly laying his bedding down on a trove of potsherds, the author says, any understanding of the landscape that fails to embrace the story of these people and their descendants is fundamentally incomplete. Scientists estimate the canyon formed roughly 6 million years ago. The first evidence of human presence in the area dates back 10,500 years ago. So I would like to go over a little bit of the history of the Grand Canyon. 900 years ago, the ancient Pueblo people lived there. In 1540 was the first European exploration of the canyon, and they were accompanied by the Hopi. Hopi, Hopi, some people say it different ways. In 1869, Major John Wesley Powell led the first successful expedition the length of the Colorado River. There's an entire chapter in the book about that expedition. It's a very significant part of the history of the canyon. In 1882, Senator Benjamin Harrison introduced the first of several unsuccessful bills to establish the Grand Canyon National Park. 11 years later, he's now the president, and he designated it as a forest reserve. In 1908, Theodore Roosevelt designated it as a national monument, and in 1919, President Woodrow Wilson made the Grand Canyon a national park to protect the land and the resources within it managed by the National Park Service. In 1975, the Grand Canyon National Park Enlargement Act was passed by President Gerald Ford, doubling the size of the park and returning the land to the Havasupai. I'm going to take a little side note here. When, on the second trip that I made into the canyon, which was last year, in the evening there was a ranger-led program, and 3 of the 4 of us that hiked together attended it. And it was all about this act and the controversy and how it played out. And they asked for volunteers, and I was reading the part of Barry Goldwater. And so I was in defense of one side, and another person at the bottom of the canyon was reading the other side, and then we had to vote. And then the ranger discussed what an impact this had and how significant it was. So it's a date on the slide, but I just wanted to add, this is very relatable to me because I attended a program that made it very vibrant and real. In 1979, it was named a World Heritage Site. I think any place that's named a World Heritage Site, it helps bring people in and gives it recognition. And then in 2023, Indian Gardens was renamed Havasupai Gardens. So when I hiked down in 2014, there's a place called Indian Gardens. It's on the way up from the Bright Angel Trail or down, depending which way you're headed. And it's a place where you can there's bathrooms, you can get water, it's a rest stop. They are finally really realizing this land needs to be Havasupai. It's not Indian Gardens. And last year, just before we traveled down, I think it was in May and we were there in June, they renamed it. And I was very glad to see that. The author shares a lot of information about a number of the tribes that are a part of the history of the canyon. I decided it would be too difficult and we don't have enough time to try to cover them all. But I did choose one tribe, the Havasupai, which I'd like to explain a little bit more about. So the Havasupai are considered the guardians of the canyon, and in their view, they have always inhabited the land. They were known for their knowledge of botany. Each leaf, seed, stem, and root had a name and a specific use. By the early 1870s, the cattlemen were swarming onto their range, laying claim to the grasses and the springs. And prospectors were staking claims to the deposits of lead, zinc, and silver, and driving mules through their village. In 1882, the boundaries of a reservation were set, allotting them only 1 square mile which was clearly inadequate. I think the number, if I remember right, was they were in excess of 300 people. They got 1 square mile. There were a series of petitions submitted on their behalf by the Bureau of Indian Affairs urging the boundaries to be enlarged. Forest rangers who encountered them treated them as interlopers. Game and firewood were scarce and illness spread rampant. In 1919, President Woodrow Wilson made the Grand Canyon a national park to protect the land and the resources within it, managed by the National Park Service. But from the Havasupai's perspective, this designation was not only to prevent a natural wonder from being destroyed, but it was also to wrench the landscape away from its original inhabitants. In the eyes of park administrators, they were part of an exotic past, and they were regarded as unsophisticated and primitive. They were viewed as deadbeats and squatters with no role to play other than as a source of manual labor for low-paying jobs. I mentioned that the author met Diana of the Havasupai tribe. In the book, she is the woman in the white deerskin dress. When she met with Kevin and Pete, in addition to her native dress, she was wearing a bright red shawl, moccasins, and had streaks of hematite painted on her face. And he said she looked immaculate and regal, like an empress in the desert. And I would like to read you a quote of part of what she said to Kevin and Pete. "My people are very much a part of this place, but we were forced to leave this area, which was our home. And for many years, my elders before me have fought against that, to say no," she said. "We have already been pushed too far. We have already been punished too much. We are real. We are not just a name. We are humans, and we are a part of this world right here because this is our home." Only when the keening subsided did she wipe away her tears, which had already smeared the hematite paint on her face, and she resumed speaking. "I'm sorry to be so emotional. It is the tears I cry for my people." She continued to wipe her cheeks with one hand while rearranging the shawl around her shoulders with the other. And then she delivered the final portion of the message she wanted to convey to us. "This is a very powerful journey you are on, and by the time you have finished," bless you, "you will realize that something in you has changed. But to really see the canyon, to touch and feel and hear everything about this place, you will have to pay attention. Slow down, listen, take time to observe, especially the little things like a lizard in the rocks, or maybe some birds flying by in the morning. Because all the creatures you will meet, they are trying to tell you something." She paused as if underscoring the importance of our remembering what came next. "Everything down there, all of it, it's alive." For the last part of my presentation, I'm going to discuss some of the things from the book that were particularly relatable to me. And I'm accompanying these thoughts with photos from my hike. So all the photos you're going to see are pictures I took. So, regarding all the mistakes they made in their first attempt, you don't know what you don't know. As absurd as it was that they were starting out the way they did, there are times we make mistakes and we learn from them. You don't run a marathon without training. You run 3 miles, and you run 5 miles, and finally you get to a 10K, and then you run a half marathon. Eventually you can run a marathon. These people had no hiking experience, and they were trying the most difficult hike. Not related to the Grand Canyon, but just to share one thing that was very relatable. Early on in my hiking years, I didn't have a lot of experience then. I was up in the high peaks in the Adirondacks, and it was a group of 9 women from my family, 2 or 3 generations, my sisters, some daughters, some nieces, a friend. And we had a hike that we learned from. We were hiking into Johns Brook Lodge, which is 3.5-mile hike from the garden to the lodge. On the way in, my sister Holly slipped, it was raining, she slipped and it ended up, she had broken her wrist or her hand. She didn't really know that, she knew she had a lot of pain. We got to the lodge, she got some help. One of my nieces is a doctor. One of the other people there had an ace bandage. My niece got a spoon from the kitchen and made a splint. We took care of Holly, lots of ice, all right? The next day we're gonna hike Haystack. Haystack has a double summit. Really, the only really experienced person in our group was my niece Sheila, who has been, what was she in the national park? She was like a ranger. She worked in the national park. She's really experienced. So we start out, there's 8 of us now, because Holly's sitting at the lodge with ice on her hand. And we get to the first, there's like a false summit. We divided into 2 groups, a slower group and a faster group, which is good. 4 people's enough to hike with. And the faster group's coming down from the summit when the slower group was still heading up, and it's getting pretty late in the day. Ended up that we hiked out in darkness. Only 1 or 2 people in our group even had headlamps or any light source. It was a very dangerous thing that we had done. We were out of food, and most of us were out of water. But the lessons, when you start out hiking in the morning, you always know what time is sunset, you divide it in half, and you turn around whether or not you make the summit. We didn't do that. We should have had a second night of lodging. We shouldn't have planned to hike out from the lodge an extra 3.5 miles. We should have stayed overnight 2 nights at the lodge. Well, we didn't do that either. You know, we should have had extra food. We all should have had a headlamp. 10 essentials, it's a hiker thing. You have 10 essentials. One of them is a light source, 1 is extra food, 1 is shelter, you know. So, you know, I just could relate. As absurd as it was in this book, I was like, well, we've all done this. We've all made mistakes. Light seemed to be pouring upward from its depths, and color was everywhere. Each square inch of stone was saturated in lustrous tones: almond and rose, chestnut and salmon, chocolate and peach, coffee and eggplant and plum, of rock that had been left to marinate and mellow in the urn of time. This is my favorite photo from 2 trips in the canyon. It's taken at the bottom of the canyon in the morning light in my 2014 trip. The sun in the bottom of the canyon is just amazing. The light is part of the visual, you know, splendor. Is just the light in the canyon. So when he started talking about the light, I was just like, oh yeah, my favorite pictures are with light. He talks about how you can see things no one would ever see unless you were there on the river at the bottom of the canyon. And there's a description of one morning, there's pelicans, which is not what you normally would see in the canyon. But they literally sat and watched this flock of pelicans for at least an hour, maybe a couple of hours, and they were swooping, and he describes this scene of pelicans. And I thought, yeah, you do. You just see things you would never see anywhere else. So my pictures to accompany this thought is these are the bighorn sheep that graze seemingly like just attached to the side. Like, how do they stay there, right? And they move, they walk around and they graze. And no one sees that unless you get down into the canyon. And then I also had to put a picture of what the Colorado River looks like as you're approaching it. So those are 2 views that you just wouldn't see unless you were out there hiking in it. Drawn by its beauty, captivated by its thrills, unable to break free of its own joyous pull, they just couldn't get enough of it. I feel the beauty of the canyon is addictive. I am one of those people who, so many hikes, so little time. People have so many books, so little time. I don't want to go back to the same place because there are so many places I want to go. The Grand Canyon is one of 2 exceptions for me. I went there and I knew I wanted to go back. And I still want to go back again. I would like to do a 3rd hike there at least one more time. So I think there's something very special about the canyon. And these 2 pictures that I chose to illustrate this slide, this is the moon rising over the canyon when you're in the bottom. So this is like a dusk photo. And this is another morning light photo because I just love the way the canyon looks with the morning light. These are both from my 2023 trip. that are most worth visiting, they're never easy to get into or back out of, are they? This is a quote from the book. This is a picture of the switchbacks. So I guess I'll tell you what our trips were. In 2014, one friend and I went in April, which beautiful spring flowers, oh, just a beautiful time of year to go. We hiked down the South Kaibab Trail and up the Bright Angel Trail. Those two trails are very, very different. South Kaibab is desert-like, no services at all, very, very steep. Bright Angel has the Indian Gardens, which is now called Havasupai Gardens, with services along the way. It's along a creek, so there's some, it's not like a dry desert. There's actually some water crossings, and you see more vegetation, you see more animals. But on the South Kaibab Trail, which is very open, exposed, and desert-like, often you can see all the switchbacks of where you're headed. So I just thought this is a good illustration of some of the challenges. So even though it's a developed trail, and you've got a place you know where you're going to walk, it's really pretty challenging. It's very steep. There's one point on the South Kaibab Trail where there's drop-offs on both sides. And the trail's like here, and there's literally drop-offs both ways. In the April trip of 2014, it was high winds. It was 30 to 40 mile an hour winds. And my friend and I were scared. We were worried. So we actually got down real low and kind of hugged the canyon to make sure we didn't get blown off either side until we got through that exposed section. And then it was okay again. It was fine after that. What? Was it coming? I didn't tell you that? I chose these pictures to illustrate the difficulty because these I'm going to talk about is the temperatures and the heat. So just before you get to, at the bottom there's a place called Phantom Ranch. It's a canteen where you can get some snacks, you can get a meal if you've ordered it ahead. There's a campground, there's a bathhouse. There are dormitories, but they're not currently open. There are cabins. And to get to the Phantom Ranch, you'll cross the Colorado River and hike a little further. So just before you cross the river, there's like this tunnel, like this place that you go through this tunnel in the rock, and then you're on the bridge over the river. And there's probably a mile and a half left of our hike at this point. But we stopped in that shade because we were so hot. We had to get out of the heat. My friend, who's in this picture, was having some nausea. She was nauseous. I have more than one water bottle in my hands because I was dividing up our remaining water to make sure everybody had water. We were making sure everybody had electrolytes. We were so hot. I actually wrote down the numbers. Temperatures are challenging. When we hiked in April, it was 35 degrees at the top at 7:30. We started in full layers, gloves, hats, everything. And when we got to the bottom, it was 86. In June, it was 48 at the top, and we started an hour earlier. We started hiking at 6:15 in the morning because of the heat. And it was 105 at the bottom. So it felt like walking into an inferno. So Jane was nauseous. We also took her pack so she wouldn't have a load. So the last mile and a half she could go without a pack. Divided up the water, make sure everybody had electrolytes. They also advise you hiking back up out of the canyon that you start very early. The next day we started at 5 o'clock in the morning. It was 72 degrees. Down from 105, but 72. The last picture, my friend Peggy would probably not love that I shared this picture. But her solution to the heat, because she was feeling it, was to take her shirt off, which was an SPF shirt, drape it over her head, put her ball cap back on top, just to give her kind of like a tent of shade. And also with this picture, I want to mention the difference between 2014 and 2023. South Kaibab Trail, open desert like no services. By the time we went back 9 years later, they had built a shelter to get you out of the sun. So we stopped there and had lunch. So this was our lunch spot. The first time down, there was no service, it wasn't developed at all. They also had composting toilets there. no water source. You still needed to have enough water, but at least like an aid station, a place where you could get out of the sun, and a place with composting toilets. Sooner or later, every difficult journey collides against a moment that crystallizes the imperative of accepting that the outcome of any ambitious undertaking can neither be ordained nor engineered by its participants, and that the heart of an odyssey is reached. And its deeper truth begins to reveal themselves. Only after the illusion of control is permitted to fall away and disappear into the gathering night like a loose pebble over a cliff. This is another view of the switchbacks. I love the rock up here. The first trip when there was no place to stay in the shade, this is what you did for shade. You found a place where there was a rock and you got under it. The biggest lesson I have learned in all my years of hiking is to let go of control. We think we plan, we prepare. There are so many factors that are not up to us. My dad died while I was hiking in Spain. I never would have thought that was going to happen. I had to be flexible and deal with that. My last hike, to become a 46er in the Adirondacks, thunderstorms, lightning. I didn't finish that day. You know, we can plan, we can work hard, we can do all the things we can, and we have to let go of control. There is something greater that we just, and they felt that. They understood that after they were doing this big hike. Comparison to a cathedral. The author talks about it felt like a cathedral. Light that is comforting and warm. So again, the light. This is at the bottom in the river with the morning light. This is just some of the beautiful rocks. And it does feel like a very spiritual place. It is sacred ground for natives. I'm certainly not a native, but I could feel that. I remember in the 2014 trip, my first time down, all of a sudden this song, How Great Thou Art, came to mind. When I, an awesome wonder, consider all the worlds thy hand has made. It's just so much beauty that it's hard to even describe what that experience. It's very spiritual. He also mentions, besides the light, that they found themselves speaking in hushed tones, kind of like silent. And I understand that as a little bit reverent, you know, to be down there and to see this. Something about the gnarled purple laurels contorting their undersides seemed to underscore not only how small we were, but also how far we had descended. I chose these two pictures to give you a little perspective. These are both from our 2014 trip. And the perspective is not only do you physically look very small, but you would begin to realize how tiny we are in this vast world. You know, there's something so much bigger. Because all trails that appear to lead away from the place you're from will eventually circle back and drop you where you began, in a manner that might, if you're attentive and very lucky, enable you to see it for the first time. When you go and do a big adventure and you come home, the house doesn't even look the same to you. The house hasn't changed. It's because you've changed. And it's not just about hiking. I remember when we had our first child, we went to the hospital, which was across the street from our house. I came home 2 or 3 days later and I thought the house looked different. The house wasn't any different. My whole world had changed because I became a mom. And I feel that way about any big challenge that you undertake. You go there, you somehow are changed, you come home and you really appreciate home more and you see it differently. And this also relates to one of my favorite sayings, which is, if it doesn't challenge you, it won't change you. And I would like to end with another passage from the book. The author starts, so the context of this is, he's back there with his brother, and they're on Bright Angel Trail, which is very popular, lots of people. And I remember when we hiked out on Bright Angel the first time, there were tourists who weren't really hikers, and they were coming down a half mile or a mile and then turning around. And we saw a woman in a leather jacket, short shorts, and high-heeled sandals. No water bottle, nothing, no water bottle, hiking on the trail, you know, and so Kevin is relating to seeing that type of thing, but here's the conclusion he comes to. They were pilgrims, each and every one of them, and what made them so was neither the difficulty of the path they had chosen, nor the distance they intended to travel. They were pilgrims because they had come to a holy place, a cathedral in the desert, in hope of standing in the presence of something greater than themselves, something that would enable them to feel profoundly diminished and radically expanded in the same breath. They were pilgrims because there is something sacred in the belief that despite its ugliness and its many depravities, there are still places in our fallen and shattered world where wonder abides. But most of all, they were pilgrims because they were seeking their benedictions on foot, the simplest and humblest means of all, which meant that they were doing the very thing that my father had prepared my brother and me to do, each in his own way, all those years ago. They were going for a walk in the park. That's the end. Did I take questions? Yes?
So I have a question. You mentioned being a 46er, and I didn't know what it meant, but I looked it up, but I think maybe other people don't, and I think it's really impressive. So could you share?
So there are 46 mountains in the Adirondacks that are considered the high peaks, and if you hike each one of those 46 mountains, you're in a sort of a group of people called 46ers. Mount Marcy is the highest peak in the state of New York, and I actually wrote down statistically how that compares to the canyon, because I'm thinking if there's other hikers, they're like, what is the canyon like? How hard is it? Mount Marcy stands at 5,000, let me see the exact number, 5,343 feet elevation, and it has an ascent of 3,821 feet. So in other words, you're starting not quite 2,000 feet above sea level and you're going up, right? The canyon, the descent on South Kaibab is a descent of about 5,000 feet, and it's in about 7 miles, so it's very steep. The Bright Angel Trail, which we took up, is an ascent of 4,700. So it's a little more than the highest peak in New York State, but of course in reverse, because you go down first and then go up instead of going up and then down. So yeah, so the Adirondack 46 is that you've hiked all the high peaks.
And I think there's a very small number of people.
Actually, that number's over 15,000 now. But they've been keeping statistics since, I can't remember the exact year they started keeping statistics on 46ers. I think it's been almost 100 years, maybe in the 20s or 30s.
And so that's
So in 100 years, 15,000 people have done it. By contrast, though, I am working away at walk in California and do it in sections. It's called the California Missions Trail. It's also called El Camino Real. And I've done 4 trips, and I'm going out again in 2 weeks. I'll be out there. And that is almost 800 miles from San Diego to San Francisco. And they're only like at 100 and some people. But they've also only been tracking that and recognizing that achievement for maybe 20 years. So, you know, 100 years, 15,000 people. Maybe 15 or 20 years, we've got a little over 100.
I think that's very impressive.
Yeah. So it's people like me that get hooked and they just keep going back at it. But my 46, I did my first high peak like 21 years before I finished. I didn't even know that I wanted to be a 46er. It wasn't on my radar. That was not the plan. I just loved hiking and wanted to try another hike. And my sister Holly and I went and did Giant. And I loved it. And I still wasn't necessarily going to be a 46er. What changed was COVID. When I couldn't go anywhere else, but I could go there and feel safe because you're outdoors, I started going. I usually went to the Adirondacks once a year, maybe a second time in the fall. Year of COVID, I think I went 4 or 5 times because it's the only place I felt safe going. The same time that COVID hit, and it was the only safe place I felt going, I also reached the halfway mark. Okay, I'm halfway. I'm going to make this a goal. Then I went at it, and I was doing 8, 10 peaks a year because I like, oh, now I'm going to be a 46er. But it wasn't the goal when I started, so yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
I came a little late. Was there any mention at all about the mule trips down into the canyon?
I gave us statistics about how many people ride the mules, and we saw mule trips on both trips. I did bring a Shutterfly book that I created of my first trip, and there are a few pictures in here of the mules. There's 2 different types of mule trains. One is with people, and the other one is pack mules. For this Phantom Ranch at the bottom, the food has to come in, the garbage has to go out. You also can mail a letter from the bottom of the canyon. So last year I sent postcards to all my grandchildren from the bottom of the canyon because I wanted them to have the cancellation, you know, and it was from Phantom Ranch. So there are mules that are just pack mules and there are mules that carry people. It's another way to do it, but, and I know Bill said he'd do that. I don't think I want to. I trust my own feet. I don't want to be on the back of a mule.
I did the halfway down.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, and it was very, very scary, but I trust the animal.
You trust the
like that,
animal,
and
yep.
The mules are perfect.
Yeah.
In fact, when I tried to purchase the mule I was riding.
It wasn't for sale, huh? Yes?
Did you take all the water you needed, or did you purify some water when you got like down to the river?
We did not take a pump and a filter to purify water. On the way down, we had all the water we needed, but as you saw in the picture, we were kind of close. We were divvying it up to make sure everybody's okay. At the bottom, there are water sources, and on the way back up, that Havasupai Gardens halfway point has a water source. So we did not carry a filter. I have a lot of times in the Adirondacks or other hikes that I've done, you have to filter and pump water, like in the White Mountains, I've hiked up
I
there.
used iodine tablets.
Yep, they do the same.
Yeah.
Yep. Make sure it's safe, that's all, and make sure your water is safe. Also about water, that hyponatremia, which is what Pete was suffering from. If you read about hyponatremia, it says that you've got too much water, but the real problem isn't too much water, it's lack of electrolytes. So your body, the water just continues diluting the electrolytes, and you can't function without sodium and potassium. So I always have electrolytes with me, no matter where I'm hiking. Even at the county park, I'll put some in my pack. Not that I expect anything to happen, I know the trails, I'm not gonna be there that long, but I always carry electrolytes.
Good advice.
Yeah. Other questions? And they can be in many forms. You know, electrolytes can be Gatorade, they can be tablets that you drop in water, they can be sport beans that you chew. There's a lot of ways to get electrolytes, but you should always have some with you.
Which way do you prefer for the electrolytes?
I usually, like for California, which I'm leaving for in less than 2 weeks, I'll be taking the tablets because I'm flying on a plane and they're the most compact and they're lightweight. Or the powder, like when I was in Spain, I only used the powder packets because they were the easiest to take. But the sport beans are good. I don't like to chew when I'm running. I don't mind chewing when I'm hiking, but I don't want to chew when I'm running. I want to slurp it now. They've also got like goos, little packets that they taste like pudding. Yeah. So, yes?
Did you ever come across like venomous snakes or anything like that that was challenging to you, that you really had to be careful around?
We did
where you
see
stayed?
snakes. We saw snakes down there. I don't know snakes well enough to know if they were venomous. I have seen rattlers at Letchworth. Yeah. And yeah, you know to stay away from them. We didn't have any problem with that. You know, the one thing we saw though that I didn't mention a lot, I said he sat down or tried to make his bed in potsherds, is you can see archaeological remains. You can see them. Potsherds are like broken pieces from an archaeological dig. He basically sat down on an archaeological site and didn't realize he was doing it. And that's when he said the history of this place is so important. You can't talk about this place without talking about the history. Really close to Phantom Ranch, between that tunnel where we had to stop to get cooled off and where our destination was, there's an archaeological site where you can see the remains of where they had rooms, and you know, it's really fascinating. It's ancient, ancient history. Yes?
Is it not marked off because you want to keep the pristine view of the area, or how did he mistakenly sit in this?
Oh, well, so what they did was very far from what I did, okay? I did the hike that anybody who wants to do a normal hike, you know, you go on these established trails, you stay at an established place. They went end to end and were in backcountry where there's no developed campgrounds, there's no anything. And they're seeing it out in the wild where maybe nobody has even excavated there before. So they're just coming upon it in a very real and natural way. Whereas like the places that I hiked are established trails, The one that's near Phantom Ranch, it's kind of marked off. Like they have a placard to tell you about it, you know, typical. And the canyon, the reservations at the bottom of the canyon are really hard to get. You have to plan a trip like this at least 14 months ahead. There is a lottery system, and you have to get in the lottery and then get chosen. And the first time we went down, just my one friend and I did it, and it was April, and we stayed in the dormitory style housing. So it's bunk beds, the women in one lodge and men in the other with a shower room. And when we went back, the dormitories were closed, and they still are. They had a real problem with the source of water, and so they're doing updating to the infrastructure at the bottom of the canyon. And so when we went back, the only way you could get a lodging was a cabin, or you get a permit and bring a tent. And then we didn't want to carry the extra weight. You know, we didn't want to really have to tent. We wanted a cabin. So and the cabins have water, running water in them. Yeah.
Their first hike was 2015, you said?
Yeah, 2015 is when Pete said, let's go do this. So I don't know if it was that year or the next year.
I was going to say, how much time was between their first failing and how long did they have to train to be able to succeed?
I don't know how long they trained, but what happened is this guy, Rich, who had been in charge of the first expedition, he's the one that used the inReach to call for help. He started reaching out to people he knew in the hiking community and asked them, will you help these guys, will you help these guys? And he helped kind of get this crew together, and they had different specialties. They also did rappelling off of the rock, which I've not done. I used trails. They actually used ropes and rappelled off rocks. I mean, this was a hardcore hike. Yeah. And so they trained and they learned skills, and they, like I said, they redid their nutrition plan to make sure they were ingesting enough calories so they wouldn't get in a bad spot again, you know. Quite a science to do what they did.
Yeah, I wondered if it was months or years.
I don't know how long they trained, but I know their whole hike was about a year. Between the first attempt and then going back, and then they actually had to leave the canyon one more time. So they did it in like 3 segments, and it was over about a year. Yeah. Yes?
Are the trails generally in good shape, or do they vary?
They're very good. I'm amazed how nice those trails are. It is not like the Adirondacks where you're rock hopping and finding a place for the next foot. These trails are really well maintained, the ones that we used. Now I haven't done the North Rim, and I said I'd like to go back again. I really would love to do rim to rim.